And next up, we have Loren Schmidt talking about their inverse terrain solver. And I will admit, Loren, that when you submitted this talk, I immediately Googled it and then shared it to all of my Game Jam friends because it was so valuable. So thank you for sharing with us, and take it away.
All right. So I'll be giving a talk about a technique for generating terrain. But before I start, I wanted to read a bit of this poem. This world is the city of truth. Its maze of paths enchants the heart. We can reach the goal without crossing the road, such is the sport unending. I will be primarily presenting here, but should you see either of these two characters in the background, here's a convenient identification guide. Octavia is currently hiding in a box behind me. So before I start, I wanted to say that I'm going to be talking about a fairly technical approach for generating terrain. If I am offering this in the hope that it will be useful to others. If anyone here is not from a technical background, please be aware that this talk was constructed with you in mind. This is intended for all audiences, regardless of whether you do procedural generation or not. Should this be useful to you technically, I'm glad. But if not, I hope that it will be interesting on a design level or as a window into someone else's process. So the first half of this talk will be about the design and aesthetics side of this, and I'll go through some of the motivations that brought me to developing this system. And then the second half will be about the algorithm itself. So broadly, I'm making a roguelike with a particular emphasis on the terrain scale of business. And I wanted a technique which would offer space for expressive range and fine-tuning of important details, particularly fine details, which can be challenging with certain techniques. I wanted to produce terrain which is more about design than geology, but which evokes and is inspired by geology. On a large scale, I want output to feel rich and organic. I'd like the terrain to be physically self-consistent in certain ways. And lastly, I'd like it to support inland bodies of water and waterways. A technical note, I'll be tabbing back and forth between a live demo of the software and slides, so pardon me if there's some minor hiccups here and there. So first I'll go into more detail about the fine-grained features of procedural generation and why I wanted to design for flexibility in this realm. I think a good place to begin is working out a particular definition of the term reading. The idea of reading comes from traditional board games. Any environmental state implies a set of possible futures, branching courses to run. This here is an example of a single sequence of play in the corner of an opening of a game of Go. If we look at the stones 1 through 6 in order, we see that a local structure has developed there. Now, reading also applies to softer situations where particulars are less known or more numerous. This is also one sequence of play in the opening of a game of Go. If you follow the numbers, you'll see that this starts very sparse, becoming more defined over time. The first 4 stones, in fact, are placed in completely different corners of the board. Reading also applies to this situation. This is an empty Go board. If you're familiar with this set of rules, even in situations where the environment contains no data at all, a known set of rules saturates the space with reading possibilities. If any of you have played any Go, you're probably already imagining where you're going to open and what you're going to do if your opponent plays in the opposite corner. So it's, I guess what I'm trying to introduce here is the idea that there's a lot of mental process latent in perception, and that applies to grid-based games in a really interesting way. So grid-based games have a very particular cadence. On a character scale, an environment speaks with this via lines of sight, how we deal with diagonals, the frequency of bends in corridors, presence or absence of pillars. This is a screenshot from very early in the development of the game I'm doing right now. At this point in time, the player character could move, but there was no erasing yet. So what we're seeing is one single course of actions constrained by how the player character and the environment interact. When acclimatized to a game, on looking at a broader view of an environment, we sequentially or by gestalt read out these possible threads of future states. For instance, near the player character in this screenshot are several rooms with pillars. If anyone's familiar with Angband or related games, they may have immediately identified these as spaces something could be concealed, or places one could return to as a place of refuge. So one way we might choose to think about landscapes is in terms of reading. If we look at a terrain of a game, what interesting ambiguities does it present? What missing information is there? And how are we engaged in parsing or creatively interpreting it as a result? So this is a print by Goya that I'm really fond of. I was in agonies here because there actually was a much higher detailed version of this, but it didn't have the wonderful fatiguing this one does. So we're going with a really crummy version. So when we're looking at a specific representation of a landscape, what is it spurring us to wonder or imagine? So what we have here is there's some sort of habitation in the background. I would say that's what the drawing is of. But if you look at the midline, basically half of it is covered by a giant boulder. So really fully half of what we're seeing is in our imaginations. So what's behind this? I don't know, is there a bridge here that leads to the top of the waterfall? There might be an interesting causeway at the height of the water that leads in. Perhaps there's some sort of gate here. Maybe there are a set of agricultural fields or habitations outside of the wall, as is often the case with walled villages. Here's the really nice quality version one. Okay, so when one's looking at a depiction of a landscape, let's keep in mind a couple of things. So how is the presentation or form of it evoking interesting possible futures? What places are we imagining visiting? What types of experiences are we imagining? What choices does that presentation cause us to consider? As I'm looking around for concrete design examples that approach this type of thinking, one thing that comes to the forefront of my mind is not actually landscapes at all, but procedurally generated interior spaces. So within this context, the bandwidth we have for designing that type of deep reading is the flexibility of our techniques. Over time, we've collectively developed a set of largely piecewise approaches for generating interior spaces. This is an example of a creative realm where we've collectively achieved excellent fine-grained control. We can craft individual routines for types of hallways, changing such factors as the number of turns, how long they are, how often they lead to dead ends, how wide or narrow they are. There are any number of different algorithms we might choose for types of labyrinths or rooms, algorithms which apply postfixes, etc. We have a great deal of bandwidth for interacting directly with how we read environments. So this algorithm is intended to work in a variety of different games. It will work for things that aren't turn-based, things that aren't gridded. It's pretty flexible, but to inform some of the design thinking I'm doing here. And oh my God, this little 1x3 and this connector, this is gonna kill me. So I'll dip into the structural particulars of my game briefly to inform some of the design and aesthetic thinking. So the format here is that the player character is in a rectangular screen, and each individual screen has an immobile camera which frames it. And if we proceed to any of the sides, we enter into an adjacent screen. Each screen maps to a single pixel in the world map. And this is what's called flick screen, if you're a horrible nerd. So one might stay in a small portion of the world, but there's potential here for a lot of long distance travel in this game. This interacts with the particulars of navigating and reading the landscape. To further ground this, there's also a certain amount of per cell data, which isn't part of the algorithm we're discussing. Some of this structure is natural. There are forests and areas that have boulders or bedrock. Some of this structure is built. That might include things like cities and roads. There are also non-physical components to this. Immaterial routes that trade progresses along through bodies of water, migration routes, conflicting notions of place names or borders. Now, roads and open areas are guaranteed traversable. You have a reasonable expectation of being able to proceed in one side of any screen and into one of its neighbors. But the forest and stone areas that I mentioned before are not guaranteed traversable. So while you may be able to find paths through them, they may be somewhat more circuitous and they will most definitely take longer. Roads are quicker to travel along per cell and are often a functional way to go from town to town or to travel long distances. But depending on where you're going, what you're doing, or the experience you want to have, a road may not be the ideal route. When you're traveling around a screen at a time, reading particular courses one might take, the details of map shapes carry quite a bit of meaning. The shapes of coasts and terrain types, distance between clustering and distribution of islands are important. Inland, the shape of water features is important. When you're traveling along a waterway, the land is a barrier. If instead you're traveling by land, the water is the barrier. These shapes must work both in negative and in positive. As in so many areas of game design, there's no real separation here between function and aesthetics. Bodies of water and other elements, such as hills, mountains, and cliffs, provide structure, define the larger scale elements of our aesthetics, and provide interesting reading on a finer scale. So I'll proceed now to the second goal, which is self-consistency. As a design goal, physical self-consistency is simple enough. For my project, I wanted the world to feel magical, but also to make sense as a physical object one could hold in the mind. Some specific technical details shook out of this. These are not really important to consider at this point, but what is important is that there's an intimate relationship between how the algorithm functions and the constraints that we choose. Some constraints might vastly simplify the work we do later, and others might add constraints on it. So we'll talk about each individual part of this later. I knew I wanted to have well-shaped bays, fjords, inland bodies of water like alpine lakes and large seas. These sorts of structures can be somewhat tricky to generate procedurally, depending on the approach one takes. But in terms of considering options, generally speaking, I wanted to have a certain amount of agency over the shapes, rather than hoping the shapes I want will form happenstantially. So given these options, what approaches to terrain might work here? So I am at heart a simulationist. I really like simulationist approaches both to design and to generating specific artifacts. I think one thing to consider here, however, is that the locus of control when working with simulation techniques is very particular. We're editing such things as physical processes. We're tuning sets of parameters for materials and physical forces. And then all of the particular structures, which we do in fact have a really intimate aesthetic relationship with, shake out of that process. So should a simulationist approach produce, say, an island that's 3 pixels wide, and we want our islands to be 4 pixels wide and have gaps that are exactly 6 pixels between them, there's no real lever within that process that lets us directly affect the result that we want. Instead, we're left to do something like adjust the rate at which magma is extruded by volcanoes and play that against erosion and hope it will alias down to a grid correctly. Actually, as an aside, I once implemented a plate tectonics simulation in an earlier version of this project. I have very fond memories of it, but I will say that the next version of the project had no plate tectonics appended to the file name as a reminder. So another thing that I really love for generating terrain is noise-based approaches. This is video of a tribute to the old shareware game Noctis, which I'm hoping to release at some point in the near future. So noise-based approaches are quite flexible, and they're a wonderful natural partner for procedural generation in many ways. Among other challenges I anticipated, one problem with noise-based approaches is they're not terribly good at doing piecewise variation. It's hard to seamlessly transition from one type of terrain to another. I'm working against the grain here in this project, even getting like clustered craters and multiple types of terrain. It would be really hard to do something like naturally vary between several different types of geology with different sorts of local features. So where does that leave us? For this project, where I've landed is I want more freedom to shape things, especially details, in very particular ways. And intuitively, that feels more hands-on to me, possibly piecewise. It also feels like it might be best if the fine features lead. And I didn't know a way to generate terrain which worked that way. So that landed me at working backward. Pardon me, I'm having multiple device issues. So the simplest possible version of this is just walking uphill. We're going to switch into a live demo here. So here we have a square patch of terrain in the middle of an ocean. If we start with our shores, which are next to water, which is at sea level, and we just work inward and we walk uphill each time we take a step, we get this, which is a pyramid. And that's perfectly self-consistent with this map. Now, if we wanted an inland lake, we run into a question. How high is the lake? One way to do that is we can start by detecting the lake and hide it. So we're doing like a topological island tester here by labeling every pixel in the world and then flood filling those outward. So like if you got 37 in the corner of your island here, the whole island is going to end up being 37. And then you can go, okay, well, how big is number 37? Okay, it's like under this threshold, so that's not an ocean. So that's a really easy way you can detect all your inland lakes. What we can do now is we can solve the initial pass on the terrain, just like we did before. And now we have a height value for every pixel of our lake. And if we look at the edges of it, we can see how it fits the terrain. Now, if we select the lowest point on here, which in this example is the eastmost edge here, and we place the terrain at that height vertically, we know that it won't ever be proud. It won't ever be too high for the terrain at any given point. But we end up with cliffs along the uphill sides. So let's reconcile that. So what we're going to do here is run the process we did from the sea level and the lake at the same time. And what we end up with is these wave fronts that meet, and that creates interesting composite structures like creases and crests and peaks where the wave fronts collide. Now, if I were to slice this island in half, one issue with this technique is that all of the slopes currently look something like this in cross-section. Now, one simple way we could make this have a little more life is instead of stepping uniformly each time we walk inward into the terrain, we could use a random random value in a range. So I'm going to run the same demo here with some noise applied. So here we're doing our first pass on the terrain. So this is a really simple addition, but we've done two really important things here. First of all, our peaks and our crests are no longer perfectly straight lines when viewed either from above or from the side. And second, this is not as apparent in this very rectilinear example, but we've made a lot of our geometry significantly less on grid. So I'm going to move on to a slightly more complex example here. Now this is exactly the same process. All of the code is exactly the same except for the initial setup. What we're going to do is start with some random blocks of noise, and then we're going to run cellular automata on them to give them a little bit of continuity. If you've ever done roguelike procedural generation, this is very similar to a classic approach for generating caverns. And really, that's all you need. I'm going to present something much more complex after this, but I wholly endorse simple interpretations of this. So now we're going to run our body of water finder. We're going to do our first pass from sea level upward. Pardon the glitch in the upper left-hand corner. It's some kind of weird testbed data hygiene issue. And now we're going to do a second pass from our bodies of water upward and composite that in. So now the core of our algorithm is actually completely functional. There are a lot of ways I could improve upon this, but this is basically the heart of things. So let's go back to our initial aspirations. And we'll take stock. So we have a technique that allows us as much leeway as we want to generate different types of shapes because we've completely decoupled our initial 1-bit map from the actual terrain generation part of it. Secondly, our terrain is guaranteed to be physically self-consistent. And we've added some interesting lateral space in which to inject different types of organic texture into it in the slope solver, which is currently just a noisy pyramid, but which we can socket other things into freely. And finally, the bodies of water are completely free in terms of the shapes they can have, and the terrain is guaranteed to be retrofit to that in a way that's physically coherent. So now we're at a good part. We have essentially done everything we set out to do, and we get to decide all the things that will give our individual implementation personality and character. So what initial shapes do we want to feed into the system? This can be literally anything. We have a lot of flexibility. And second, what do we want to do with our slope solver? So now we're going to dip into project-specific particulars. Everything after this point is implementation. So really the strength of the algorithm is here in the map generation. There's really no right way to do this, so please feel free to get really aggressively weird with this. I'm hoping it will open some doors for other people's projects. You could generate the initial map using a fairly conventional technique and then use an inverse solver to fill in particulars and add detail. You could make the whole map or patches of it by hand and then shake out details procedurally. That would be interesting because people could learn the large features and then be surprised by particulars each time they played. I think one really interesting application for this, which isn't necessarily a good fit with most traditional techniques, is you could start with basic shapes created using one technique and then mix in special algorithms or handmade patches of terrain for special features. For instance, you could find a nice little peninsula that has a particular shape and place a walled village on it. Or you could identify an interesting out-of-the-way island and place a shrine on it with nothing signposting the way to it. So to ground this a little more and show part of why this technique is so useful in my own project, I thought I'd go into one specific way to generate the initial map. And that's using cellular automata. So this was one of my favorite parts of the project. I have probably a 2.5-hour talk on the tip of my tongue about this, but you're going to get the 3 to 4 minute version, unfortunately. So specifically, the initial map is generated by using patches of different rules of cellular automata. The patches are formed by randomly placing points, which are then propagated out into space until they fill space. Once I have my patches, I apply a CA rule to each of them. These are all 8-neighbor totalistic, which, if you know Conway's Game of Life, is in the same category of rules. Curating and wrangling CA is a particular joy of mine, so I spent a really long time curating these. I ended up with, at last count, 201 different rules in just the set that's actually like in the main array. I have a bunch more in my notes. So to briefly outline some of the behavior we're seeing here, all of these are run in parallel, and the edges interact live as they're developing. So for instance, this interesting green rule over here, which you also see in this first screenshot, is a coastal water rule picked from a bucket assigned to that patch of the geology. And it sort of adds a set of crenellations to whatever it touches. This red rule is also a coastal water rule, and what it's doing is a little bit more like coarse-grained and has a very different aesthetic, but it's functionally doing the same thing. So I'm going to go into the sort of like large-scale processes going on here a little more, but the heart of it is we're applying different CA to different patches. Here's my horrible, really long array of curated rules. Here's one of the tools that I made for doing mutation-based curation work. So to briefly summarize, I would say the pertinent qualities of this technique are that it offers a lot of flexibility. I'm using some piecewise approaches to govern regional variation, et cetera, which I'll talk about during the live demo. It is particularly well suited for governing local particulars, such as the clustering of islands, the gaps between certain formations, et cetera. It gives us pretty good expressive range. Any given cellular automata family will have certain types of shapes that it's adept at and certain types of situational awareness that it's good at. There are a lot of other families that could offer different aesthetics or technical particulars. In particular, I will call out that doing 3-state totalistic rules would be really lovely here. And another thing that could be really interesting to work with is multiple neighborhood rules. There is a family of CA I've experimented with that uses 2 neighborhoods to have an awareness of the difference between diagonal and orthogonal neighborhood relationships, which is really extremely good for context-specific shaping of formations. I will briefly go into some implementation-specific terrain solver ideas as well. So as you may recall, we left our map with basically just noisy slopes. This is a really simple version of this. Imagine what you could do if you built a more robust system here. So to briefly summarize one approach to this, and there are many such approaches, here's a region of the world where we're going to be running our terrain solver. So one way you might add more regional variation is we'll start with the second layer of patches. This is independent from the patches that we're using for the cellular automata because we want permutational complexity here. In our last live test, we had uniform noise applied across all of our slopes. So a simple way we might vary this is changing the amount of noise on a per patch basis. That would give us a little bit of regional variation. Now to build on that basic idea, one other idea is we could look at the way the wave solver works and figure out different aspects of that which could be parameterized. So I ended up going a lot of different directions and trying different things. I will pause during the live demo here and explain a couple of these. But before I do that, briefly, this is the same run as before. So this is the patches that generate this, and here is the output once the terrain solver's been run. So as you can see, there are a number of different curated parameter sets that are evoking different types of geology here. And now we're going to do a live demo. So we're going to exit our test bed here and look at an empty tab. No, we're actually going to look at the actual game. So here we're going to run a full initial startup sequence at 1/4 the world resolution that I'm currently using, because in our tests we found that the individual details were a little more discernible at this scale. Okay, so now we're running our cellular automata. I wanted to briefly shout out to the initial setup that's going on here. So to do our patches of terrain, actually I'll just start it over here. To do our patches of terrain, we are running a voting rule. We're seeding continents and oceans, and then we're using voting to create cohesive land masses. And then after that, we're going to procedurally place some features that wouldn't survive voting. Those include things like inland lakes or chains of islands in the oceans. We're detecting the types of terrain, edges of continents, coastal waters, island chains, lakes as mentioned before, and continent interiors. And then we're pulling from curated sets of cellular automata rules to populate regions within each of those. That gives us a little bit more of a feeling of intentionality and local geology or flavor. So we're running our cellular automata here. So as you can see, there are some regions that have pretty distinct feelings. Like there's an interesting large island over here, pretty far off of this very spongy continent. All these little marks in here, these are all water, and they're going to end up having waterways connecting them later. Now we're going to do our initial terrain pass. Here comes the terrain solver I was talking about. All right, so I'm going to pause briefly here. So we've got an edge glitch actually on the right side. That's fun. So if we look at the wavefronts though, some of these wavefronts are relatively clean, and some of them are extremely noisy, such as in this rocky region over here and on the seafloor here. If you look at the types of shapes that are forming behind each wavefront, they're quite different. So a couple of the parameters I'm playing with for the terrain solver are the speed at which each type of terrain propagates and the noisiness of the wavefront. So this much more linear wavefront here is propagating information largely in parallel. So you get this interesting fluting. And I'm using that to create sort of the bones of hill systems and gullies and such at a very, so it's got some crisp little features, but it's very low slope compared to some of the other terrain types. And then I'm using a much noisier wavefront in some of these regions to create fine hills or small mountain ranges. Another thing I'm doing here, I think I've just broken it. I'm so sorry. That's going to mess up my time. Okay, we're restarting here. I'm going to point out the voting process here. So these little patches of color are individual cellular automata rules. Okay, so when we get back to our wave solver, we need to point out one other thing, which is that I've one of the two rules for generating mountains is deliberately overpiling the terrain a little bit, so it's actually above the stable angle of repose. And then we're running a simple process on top of that, which settles that out to match a given angle of repose specified by the terrain type. So this region here, for instance, is overpiled, and probably some of this mountain range down here. As soon as we finish the lake solver pass, you'll see that slope solver running, and you'll see what that does. So one of the motivating design principles here is frequency distribution. It's if you're looking at a large undifferentiated image where the frequency is the same everywhere, it's often a little bit jarring to look at. Your eye doesn't necessarily have places to catch or rest. So it's often, I find, quite useful to have a variety of either large gestural curves or like very finely detailed higher frequency curves. Similarly, to have like patches of hills that are really high frequency, such as in here, versus like low areas that are just kind of slow and undulating. And one of my reasons for overpiling the mountains, as I described, is this. So if you have regions that are shaped primarily by the slopes settling in this phase, you get large facets, you get huge well-formed cones, and those kind of catch the eye if you're just glancing at a map. Whereas some of these like finer features that aren't butting up against that limit are able to keep all their details.
Loren, FYI, we're just getting a few minutes over on time.
Okay, well, I'm right at the end here, thank you. So here we are running waterways, and here's our finished output. So to briefly summarize, this is currently still in progress. I'm working on some particulars which I'll be posting about in the near future, like placing forests in an interesting organic way and generating cities. If you're interested in following my development on this project, feel free to follow me and interact on any of these following platforms run by horrible corporations or on Mastodon. And if you'd like to support my work on this project directly, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your conference.
Loren, thank you so much. That was very cool. And I love when, a talk sort of dovetails into a previous talk, and I'm seeing sort of some synthesis with Max's talk earlier about clustering and art assets.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, so
a lot of these features apply at different scales. It's interesting.
Right, and when you've got rules to play with, you can make all sorts of fun generative patterns there too. So yeah, thanks so much, Loren.